The protagonist, Zumo, faced execution, accused of planning a coup, a claim he refused to admit. As his life neared its end, Zumo declared he wouldn't confess. The Empress approached him, and Zumo accused her of orchestrating his poisoning, alleging that poison had been slipped into his wine the previous evening. The Empress seemed puzzled by his shock, noting that the minister had already been impeached. She reminded him of the time he once harbored feelings for her and stated that today she intended to repay him. Drawing a blade she had once received from him, she prepared to use it. When Zumo had gifted her the blade, he never imagined it would someday be turned against him. The Empress reminisced about how, in the past, the minister had supported her and urged her not to worry. Now, she told Zumo not to worry, as his body would receive an honorable burial in the imperial mausoleum, with annual offerings made in his name. As she confidently thrust the blade into his chest, Zumo realized it was truly the end. It was then that he activated a mysterious rebirth manuscript. In a flash of light, Zumo found himself in a new reality, a small, wood-decorated room. He had transmigrated into the body of a villainous prince. Determined to avoid repeating his past mistakes, he resolved to use his knowledge to survive and thrive in this new world. Previously, he had carefully guided the heroine, Ro, to stabilize the dynasty and ascend as empress. However, his efforts had ultimately led to his betrayal and death. Now, having analyzed the past events, Zumo was intent on charting a new path. An assistant entered his carriage and inquired about his wishes during the journey. Zumo simply asked how much longer it would take to reach their destination. The assistant estimated another half hour. Zumo reflected on the past, recalling his first meeting with Ru at an orphanage. This time, he vowed not to nurture her as he had before. When Zumo finally arrived at the shelter, Ru surveyed her surroundings and realized she, too, had returned to the past. Memories flooded back. She had once been an empress who, during a palace siege by coalition forces, refused to flee, waiting for someone. Her servants had been terrified, pleading with her to leave immediately. Suddenly, a witch stormed into the imperial hall, killing the loyal servants with a single wave of her magic. The witch revealed herself as Ru's long-lost sister, furious over Ru's rise to power. She mocked Ru, accusing her of living a life of luxury and fame after Zumo rescued her from the orphanage, while the witch had suffered immense hardship, battling for mere survival. The witch declared that Ru had ultimately lost, despite her crown. Ru disagreed, but the witch leaned in, explaining that her loss was inevitable because she had killed Zumo. The witch pointed out that Zumo had always been Ru's shield, preventing anyone from harming her. Furious, Ru argued against the witch's accusations, but their confrontation was cut short. Without hesitation, the witch drove her blade into Ru's chest. As the empress lay dying on her throne, the witch derided her, declaring that Ru, intoxicated by power, had foolishly sacrificed her loyal protector. According to the witch, Ru was unworthy of the title of empress. With her final breaths, Ru agonized over her decisions, believing that if she could only bring Zumo back, she could right her wrongs. If Ruazo could go back in time, she would approach things gradually. Darkness clouded her vision as she stood in the shelter, unable to comprehend how any of this was possible. A boy nearby asked if she was all right, but, overwhelmed with panic, Rua waved him off and insisted she was fine. The boy suggested she change into a clean outfit quickly, as a noble gentleman was expected to arrive soon to adopt one of the children. A cold sweat broke out on Rua's skin. She instantly realized it had to be Zumo. In her previous life, he had been the one to take her from the orphanage. Now, she saw this as a chance to fix everything, to meet him again, and to avoid repeating her past mistakes. Suddenly, the teacher entered the children's room and instructed everyone to gather in the front yard once they had changed clothes. Shortly after, the children assembled in the yard. Among them was a girl destined to become the witch. The teacher scolded the girl, Ko Yong, and told her not to scare the others with her presence. He instructed her to head to the backyard, away from the noble visitor. Ko tearfully pleaded with the teacher, begging to stay in the corner of the yard, promising she wouldn't embarrass the noble gentleman. She simply wanted to see him in person. The shelter doors opened, and Zumo stepped inside, greeted by the sight of the orphans. The teacher welcomed him and invited him further in. Zumo knew that in this timeline, his fate and Lu Rua's would take separate paths, and she seemed to understand this as well. The teacher began describing the children's endurance tests, boasting that the orphans in their care were significantly superior to ordinary children, whether as slaves or as future warriors. Assuring Zumo there were many promising candidates, the teacher then pointed at Rua and praised her unique talents, claiming her bones were exceptionally rare. The price for her, the teacher noted, was therefore higher. Zumo, however, dismissed the price, saying it wasn't an issue. Just then, he felt a strange, familiar sensation. Curious, he asked the teacher about Ko Young. The teacher was quick to criticize her, calling her the weakest of all the children, with frail bones and no promise. He scolded Ko, ordering her to stop embarrassing the nobleman and leave at once. But Zumo immediately recognized her. This was the witch he had thought of earlier. He began to wonder how his story might unfold if he chose Ko this time. As Ko moved to leave, she suddenly threw herself into Zumo's arms, crying and begging him to take her with him. She swore she would serve him faithfully for the rest of her life. The teacher was outraged by her audacity and tried to pull her away, grabbing her hair, but Ko clung to Zumo and pleaded with him to take her from the orphanage. Zumo turned to her and asked if she truly wanted to leave with him. Ko affirmed this with desperation. He asked again if she would faithfully serve him, and she vowed that if he saved her, she would carry out all his commands without fail. Meanwhile, Lu Rua watched the scene in disbelief. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Zumo was supposed to choose her. In her past life, he had taken her away, not Ko Young. Yet now, for some reason, he was picking Ko instead. Rua couldn't understand what was happening. The teacher also objected, insisting that there were far more capable children in the orphanage than Ko Young. He urged Zumo to reconsider and take Lu Rua instead, emphasizing her rare talents. But Zumo was furious at the teacher's interference. He demanded that his choice be respected, warning the teacher not to question him further. The teacher, trembling, dropped to his knees and apologized profusely. Rua, unable to contain her emotions, rushed forward and begged Zumo to take her too. The teacher was outraged by her behavior, calling it disrespectful to the noble gentleman. He grabbed her by her clothes and tried to drag her away. However, Zumo turned to Rua, took her hand, and pushed her further away with a single motion. He felt a pang of frustration. He had sheltered this girl, shared his food and protection with her for years, and yet, in the end, it had all been for nothing. Zumo turned away, announcing that he would leave the orphanage with Ko Young and no one else. Lu Rua stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. The teacher, as if to add insult to injury, explained a final detail. If Zumo intended to take only Ko, the price would be 2,000 low-quality spiritual stones or 200 medium-quality stones. Zumo was caught off guard when the tutor raised the price and began to resort to blackmail. Pretending ignorance, the tutor denied any ill intent. Zumo questioned what would happen if he refused to pay at all. The tutor smugly responded that, in such a case, they would simply not allow the noble gentleman to leave. One of Zumo's guards rushed over and challenged the tutor, asking if he truly intended to try his luck with threats. Zumo ordered the ninjas to handle the situation. He left the matter in the hands of Mr. Wang, while the tutor, now trembling with fear, fell to his knees and begged Zumo to spare them. Desperate, the tutor promised to hand over all his spiritual stones and treasures. However, the tutor quickly turned his attention to Ko Young, realizing Zumo's attachment to her, and attempted to take her hostage. As he lunged toward the girl, he was struck in the arm, losing it in the process. Zumo declared that no one other than himself had the right to harm Ko. Grateful to her noble master for saving her, the girl looked at him with admiration. Zumo placed a blade into the ground before Ko and commanded her to kill the tutor with her own hands. He believed that after all the suffering the teacher had caused her, Ko had every right to exact revenge. As Ko hesitated, memories flooded back. She recalled how the tutor had forbidden her from eating, claiming she ate too much. He regularly punished her for trivial reasons, despite other educators pleading for him to stop. Trembling with fear, Ko reached for the blade. Meanwhile, Zumo realized that the tutor had likely formed a contract with a powerful individual, which had emboldened him to sell the orphans. Zumo encouraged Ko, telling her that she had endured a lifetime of mistreatment in the orphanage and that this was her chance to put an end to it. The tutor, now panicked, shouted at Ko, reminding her that he had taken her in and cared for her when no one else would. He accused her of being ungrateful and claimed he should have abandoned her long ago. Ko raised the blade, but the tutor tried to frighten her further, warning that he would haunt her for the rest of her life. Finally, with one decisive motion, Ko struck, ending the tutor's life. Zumo approached her and calmly assured her that it was over. Ko informed him that the task had been successfully completed. Zumo told her to follow him, promising that anyone who dared trouble her in the future would face a terrible fate. Wang then asked Zumo what should be done with the remaining orphans. Zumo instructed his servant to distribute money among the children so they could try to survive on their own. As Zumo and Ko Yong prepared to leave, Lu Ruo shouted after them, desperate to stop them, but to no avail. She realized that she couldn't remain idle any longer. Her next step was to find a place suitable for cultivation. After Zumo and Ko Yong boarded the carriage, Zumo asked Ko if she was hungry. Shyly, she replied that she wasn't particularly hungry, though maybe just a little. Zumo pushed several dishes toward her and told her to eat. Stunned by the abundance of food, Ko eagerly began to eat, though Zumo reminded her to slow down. He explained to her that if she wanted to follow him, he would need to remove her body's restrictions. However, once the restrictions were removed, they would be replaced with new ones, binding her to him. These restrictions would prevent her from disobeying his orders or attacking him. Any attempt to harm him would result in her soul leaving her body. Before proceeding, Zumo gave Ko the chance to reconsider, asking her to carefully think over her choice. Without hesitation, Ko paused her meal and reaffirmed her decision. She stated that she had already made her choice and had no intention of going back on her word. Zumo asked her to relax and not resist as he placed his hand on her head and activated a special technique. Afterward, he instructed her to try hitting him as a test. When Ko attempted to strike, she clutched her chest in pain. Zumo explained that the pain was a side effect of the restrictions. If she ever tried to harm him in the future, the consequences would be far worse. Ko earnestly vowed that she would never betray her young master. Suddenly, Wang peeked into the carriage and informed Zumo that they had arrived at the manor. Zumo instructed Wang to show Ko Yong to her room and have someone wash her. In the meantime, Zumo had other matters to attend to. Wang led Ko Yong to her quarters, and the girl followed him awkwardly. When they arrived, Ko was in awe of the lavish room. She couldn't believe she was allowed to stay in such a beautiful place. Embarrassed, she ran off, insisting that she would sleep in the stables instead. But Ko explained that she felt too uncomfortable staying in such a grand room. Wang laughed at her reaction. The maid insisted that Ko Yong could not sleep in the stable, reminding her that she had been personally chosen by the noble lord himself. Wang informed Ko that the servants would soon arrive to help her wash and change, while he would handle arranging a meal. This embarrassed Ko greatly, as she didn't know how to repay Zumo for his kindness. She felt undeserving of the generosity that the young master had shown her. Meanwhile, Zumo had other matters to attend to. Walking through the streets, he thought about the item he was searching for, confident it would still be in its rightful place. Approaching a merchant's shop, Zumo noticed a buyer angrily arguing with the shopkeeper over a jade pendant. The buyer complained that the pendant was small, damaged, and overpriced, claiming it was worth no more than 20 spiritual stones. The merchant, however, insisted that 20 was far too low and argued that the minimum price should be 50 spiritual stones. As the two continued haggling, Zumo stepped forward and offered 100 spiritual stones for the pendant. The merchant, stunned, asked if Zumo was serious, and Zumo replied calmly, asking if that price was acceptable. The merchant, realizing an opportunity, started to claim the pendant was a family heirloom in an attempt to raise the price further. However, Zumo cut him off coldly, pointing out that the merchant had been willing to sell the so-called heirloom for just 50 stones moments earlier. Reluctantly, the merchant agreed to the 100 stone price. The other buyer, furious, argued that he had been the first to show interest in the pendant and accused the merchant of selling it unfairly. Zumo understood that this man had hoped to purchase the pendant first, but Zumo reminded himself that, as the main character of the story, he was always destined to acquire it. After all, in the original story, Zumo had started out as a penniless orphan wandering the streets, but his unique gift for recognizing rare spiritual objects changed his fate. By sheer luck, he had discovered an ancient jade pendant that became the foundation of his journey to cultivation and immortality, leading him to the very pinnacle of power. As Zumo held the pendant, he told the disgruntled buyer that this was their final meeting. The buyer, whose name was Lenny, was enraged. He didn't understand where Zumo had come from but could sense the incredible aura emanating from the jade pendant. Lenny realized too late that the pendant was a priceless treasure and silently vowed to one day take revenge on Zumo. Meanwhile, Zumo activated the jade pendant, releasing its spiritual energy. As expected, the items he sought appeared before him: a scroll and a golden ring. These were the Cloud Scroll of Immortality and the Cloud Spiritual Key. Zumo knew that these artifacts would guide him to the entrance of a secret spiritual realm. Legends spoke of this realm as a place created by a great master of the past, filled with invaluable knowledge and ancient treasures. Zumo was determined to use these artifacts to control his destiny and unlock the realm's secrets, including the treasures of the ancient masters. After obtaining the items, Zumo returned to the manor, where Wang greeted him. Wang informed the noble lord that he had prepared a third room in the east wing for their young guest, and dinner was ready. He asked if Zumo wished for Ko Yong to be invited to the table, but Zumo replied that he would go to her personally. Wang obeyed and left. Zumo wandered through the east wing, searching for the room Wang had mentioned. After some time, he found it. Upon entering, one of the maids greeted him. In Ko Yong's room, the maids were helping her take a bath. Embarrassed, Ko told them it wasn't necessary to do everything for her and insisted on washing herself. Respecting her wishes, the maids left the room. For the first time in her life, Ko bathed in a luxurious tub and was overjoyed by the experience. She couldn't believe she was being treated this well, especially after the hardships of life in the orphanage. Suddenly, voices came from behind the door. The maids were greeting Zumo. Panicked, Ko frantically searched for her clothes but didn't have enough time before the door began to open, and Zumo entered the room. Startled and embarrassed, Ko shouted for him to wait and quickly ducked under the water to hide. Zumo, equally taken aback, realized his mistake. Apologizing for entering unannounced, he quickly exited the room. After some time, Ko finished her bath and came out to meet her master. She apologized for making him wait, but Zumo looked at her and complimented her appearance, saying the outfit suited her well. Blushing, Ko thanked him shyly. Zumo instructed her to follow him, explaining that after dinner, there was something they needed to do together. As they headed toward the dining room, one of the maids approached and respectfully invited the noble lord and his guest to the table. Lord Zumo and Ko Yong entered the dining room, where several servants informed them that the meal was fully prepared. The table was laden with dishes, and Ko Yong couldn't help but drool at the sight. Zumo encouraged her to start eating before the food got cold. Without hesitation, the girl eagerly attacked the food with rare greed, eating quickly and swallowing in large bites. One of the servants gently reminded her to slow down so she wouldn't choke, but Ko's hunger drove her to devour the meal at a rapid pace. After some time, she leaned back and admitted she was full, her stomach visibly swollen from overeating. Embarrassed, she apologized to her young master, explaining that she didn't usually eat so much. Zumo calmly told the servants to ensure the cook didn't reduce her portion sizes in future meals. The servant nodded and confirmed that 3 large meals a day would be prepared for Ko Yong. After finishing the meal, Zumo informed Ko that it was time to move on to other matters. He led her to a room and handed her the Cloud Scroll of Immortality. Zumo instructed Ko Yong to study the knowledge contained within it. He knew that if the novel's powerful villain could harness this incredible power, the results would be unprecedented and could shape a new destiny. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, the merchant who had sold the jade pendant was scolding himself for his carelessness, realizing he hadn't thoroughly examined it for hidden treasures. Just as he was inspecting fragments of a jade bracelet, an elder from the King Tang's sect approached, asking if the merchant had seen a jade keychain anywhere. The merchant recognized the item in question. It was the jade pendant Zumo had purchased earlier. Back at the estate, Zumo guided Ko-young through her first steps in cultivation. He instructed her to breathe in the spiritual forces of heaven and earth, wanting her to tap into her natural talents. Zumo understood that Ko-young, as the villain of the original story, possessed extraordinary potential. If she succeeded in cultivating these skills, it could lead to something completely new and unexpected. However, as she tried to channel the spiritual energy, Ko began coughing up blood. Alarmed, Zumo quickly picked her up and ordered the servants to call Dr. Jiang immediately. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Lenny, the boy who had lost the jade pendant to Zumo, sensed a surge of spiritual energy emanating from a nearby house. Following the trail, he opened the door and saw a young girl enveloped in spiritual power. He couldn't believe his eyes. As he accidentally stepped on a straw, the sound alerted the girl, who flew toward him in an instant, pressing the straw to his throat. The girl demanded to know who he was. Startled, the boy introduced himself as Lenny, a 15-year-old street orphan. The girl, Lu Ru, was surprised to hear his name. She remembered that, in her previous life, the ministers had urged her to recruit a member of a sect named Lenny into the court. The ministers claimed the boy had an unparalleled talent for treasure hunting, but Zumo had rejected the idea every time. Lu Ru wondered if Lenny's skills could aid her in finding rare artifacts, which would greatly accelerate her cultivation process. Lowering the straw from his throat, she invited him to join her, and Lenny eagerly agreed. Lu Ru smiled, glad to have his assistance. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Dr. Jiang examined Ko-young and explained to Zumo that, while her body was gifted with a mysterious talent, it was currently in a severely weakened state. This condition, he explained, was also the reason behind her insatiable appetite. Zumo asked if she was ready for cultivation, and Dr. Jiang said he could prepare a potion to temporarily stabilize her body. However, the process of taking the potion would be extremely painful. The doctor also warned that the potion was only a temporary solution. A complete cure would require a rare plant known as the jade grass of icy flesh. Hearing this, Zumo thanked the doctor for his work and escorted him out. Zumo approached Ko-young and asked if she had heard the doctor's assessment of her condition and the potential treatment. Leaping up from her bunk, Ko assured her young master that she would train hard and endure the pain if it meant being useful to him. Zumo warned her that the cultivation process would be excruciating, but Ko remained steadfast, declaring that she wasn't afraid of pain and would do her best to meet his expectations. Zumo responded that he hoped her words weren't empty promises. To lighten the mood, he told her they would take a walk together the following day. Seeing this as an order, Ko-young readily agreed, determined to prove herself to her master. Mr. Zumo handed Ko-young a small bag, explaining that the pollen inside would help numb her pain. Grateful for his thoughtfulness, the girl accepted the bag and thanked him. That night, alone in her room, Ko-young carefully examined the bag and sniffed its contents. She felt a sense of warmth, knowing her young master had personally given it to her, but quickly snapped herself out of her thoughts, realizing she couldn't afford to waste time. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her body and assumed it was the discomfort Dr. Jiang had warned her about. The next morning, in the dining room, Ko-young once again ate with great appetite, devouring the food greedily while Zumo observed her with amusement. She thanked him for the delicious dishes, and he gently reminded her to eat more slowly. After she had finished, Zumo took her hand and warned her to hold on tight, as they needed to leave quickly. With incredible speed, Zumo whisked them both out of the dining room, leaving Ko-young slightly disoriented. Before long, they arrived at Jade Dragon Mountain. Zumo explained that the mountain held a secret location where they might find the rare jade grass of icy flesh needed for her healing potion. Ko Young was slightly out of breath from the journey but quickly recovered. Just as they prepared to move deeper into the mountain, she heard a strange snorting sound. Turning toward the bushes, she saw the face of a beast growling at them. The beast lunged at them, but Ko Young instinctively jumped forward, warning her master to be careful. For a moment, she doubted her ability to protect him on her own.